Give me a fulcrum, Archimedes is alleged to have said, and a place to stand, and I will move the world. If you are an American who abhors where American elites are taking our nation, this platform is for you. If you've lost your job, taken a pay cut, are underemployed, have retirement savings in peril, oppose our military-industrial complex, and believe that the transnational corporations are too powerful and you are not, this platform is for you. If you are fighting to maintain and raise your standard of living, revitalize our American economy, lower the cost of healthcare, reduce U.S. dependence on Middle East oil, and build a better world, then this platform is for you. Americans are in the middle of a fundamental social transformation. It is the transition from nation-state-based economies and political power to transnational corporate cartels. It is well underway, and it is accelerating. It is irreversible, a downward spiral for hundreds of millions of Americans, rendering the American middle class extinct and propelling us into neo-feudalism. In this new global economy, most jobs can exist anywhere in the world, migrating to the lowest-cost labor and production sites, and because of broadband communications, cheap transportation, mass media advertising, transnational organizational structures, and easy access to local markets, they will be the lowest-cost producers for any local market. As a result, the global rich are getting richer. At the same time, the American middle class is disappearing as it sinks into the ranks of the growing poor. Whenever these issues are raised, the voices of the great transnational corporations and the wealthy privileged classes cry foul, accusing challengers of inciting class warfare. Yet, American working families must face the reality that many, but by no means all, of these fellow Americans feel no more sympathy for their economic plight than they do for the plight of any Bangladeshi mother of 5 who works for 5 cents an hour to make the shirts they buy at Walmart. There's a folk story told in many corporate boardrooms about adapting to change. It's the story of 2 frogs, a pot of water, and a stove. The first frog, Kermit, is placed in the pot of water, and over a long period, the stove heat is turned up. Eventually, Kermit, unable to move, boils to death. The second frog, Homer, is thrown into a hot pot of water. He immediately jumps out to safety. The moral of the story is this: if you don't perceive gradual change as life-threatening, you might very well end up like Kermit. So, it's vital to pay close attention to all the cues, be alert to danger, and act quickly. This platform is a blueprint of a plan. It presents a pragmatic alternative to the transnational corporate agenda. It details a compelling new American vision, one that ensures middle-class prosperity, embodies our core democratic values, and achieves the highest aspirations of American self-government. The first platform plank is an analysis of where we stand today, a summary of the current state of American economic, cultural, political, and national security affairs. The second plank identifies a fulcrum, a vast untapped reservoir of at least $35 trillion that we can aggregate to buy the top American transnational corporations and use them to act in our best interests. The third plank addresses a new kind of world, a new place for Americans to stand united, one that embodies America's potential. It offers detailed plans for creating a powerful, inclusive self-government, basic income streams for us all, reinventing, and making our democracy truly representative. Finally, we'll identify and list the critical initial steps necessary to move us from where we are now to where we want to be. Over the past few decades, strong forces have converged to bring about a significant shift in the American landscape. The nation is split roughly in half, the blue versus red states, and we are as polarized as in any other time in our history, most like when it was Revolutionary versus Tory, Union versus Confederate, rancher versus farmer, and industrialist versus labor. Half our nation is on either side of the digital divide and at war with one another. 80 years is just long enough for a society to lose its collective, first-hand memory of how things used to be and why it did what it did. The Americans who lived through the Great Depression are dying by the thousands every day, and with them goes their learned experience and wisdom. The New Deal was far more than a set of domestic social programs. It was a populist movement at a time when the future of democracy was in great peril. While other nations responded to economic disaster with fascism and militarism, America gave itself the New Deal, an authentically democratic worldview with pragmatic applications. The New Deal was a paradigm. and its successful succession of big government-based employment programs, public works projects, financial regulations, and social entitlement programs worked because 1. All classes of Americans identified themselves as a cohesive, interdependent free people, and 2. Economic markets were primarily local and national. These realities encouraged Americans to turn away from dictatorial, militaristic, expansionist aggression and embrace a collaborative, mutually supportive nationalism. But it was a close call, and without FDR's leadership and brain trust, it could have just as easily gone the other way. The New Deal was a social contract, an agreement among all Americans that we're all in this together, and if we work hard then we'll have the necessities, and not starve, freeze, or be shot to death. The contract is being renegotiated, diluted, reneged on, and made void. The reasons are simple: all classes of Americans no longer identify themselves as cohesive, interdependent free people, and 2. Economic markets are now primarily global. For the first time in recorded history, millions of Americans are in daily, intimate contact with people halfway around the world. Most have more in common with Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, and Pinterest than we do with our next-door neighbors. Our preconceptions about what constitutes a community are changing. Our sense of our boundaries and our affiliations are changing as well. The transnational corporate executives born and living in America find themselves in greater rapport and with more in common with millions of their network peers in Saudi Arabia, Russia, Great Britain, and Argentina than with the average Americans living outside their gated, guarded community estates. Transnational corporations with well-educated global workforces, instant broadband communications, free-flowing capital, inexpensive transportation, media domination, and access to all the world's local markets have no national allegiance. Transnational executives gain no economic or political advantage from investing domestically to bring jobs to the American middle class. Because corporations have only an economic, not social, primary purpose, it would be unthinkable to consciously raise labor costs when far cheaper labor could do the same job in Bangladesh. Although the means of a big government New Deal populist movement is no longer possible to achieve New Deal ends, an egalitarian capitalist movement can. By transforming our thinking from a tax to redistribute wealth from one class to another to an invest to share our wealth paradigm, we free ourselves from the transnational corporate stranglehold on American political and economic power. Americans can remain one nation and one community so long as we strengthen the shared core values that hold us together. To succeed, we'll have to craft a new skin for the new wine of our jointly owned federal assets. This gives us tremendous leverage and will allow us to grow our wealth while fighting to implement fair labor standards and living wages, care for the poor and infirm, and conduct business in a socially responsible way. The period from the end of World War II until the early 1970s was a time of balanced income growth in the United States. The American middle class did well, and the American dream was available to many. Since then, however, the pattern of income growth has been dramatically different. The overall distribution of earnings among American families has evolved significantly over the decades starting in 1960. It's important to note that this is a complex and multifaceted topic influenced by various economic, social, and policy factors. Here is a general overview of the changes in earnings and wealth distribution by decade. The 1960s saw a relatively more equitable distribution of earnings among American families compared to later decades. The post-World War II economic boom led to a growing middle class, with a larger share of families enjoying rising incomes. Overall income inequality was lower during this period, with a smaller gap between the highest and lowest earners. Income inequality started to increase in the 1970s. Factors such as globalization, changes in the labor market, and deindustrialization began to impact wage distribution. The growth in earnings was slower for low and middle-income families compared to the top earners. The expansion of dual-income households became more common as women entered the workforce in larger numbers. Income inequality continued to rise during the 1980s. Policies like tax cuts and deregulation favored the wealthy. The income gap between the highest-earning families and the rest of the population widened significantly. The Reaganomics era emphasized trickle-down economics, which critics argue contributed to increasing inequality. The 1990s saw a period of economic growth and a decline in income inequality. Technological advancements and the internet boom created new income opportunities. Policies such as welfare reform and increased access to education contributed to greater economic mobility for. Income inequality began to rise again in the 2000s, with a growing concentration of wealth among the top earners. Factors such as the housing bubble and the Great Recession of 2008 had significant effects on family incomes. Income inequality remained a prominent issue during the 2010s. While the overall economy recovered from the recession, many families experienced stagnant wages and income disparities. Public awareness and discussions about income inequality increased during this decade. The COVID-19 pandemic had a profound impact on earnings and income inequality. While some high-income earners were less affected, many lower-income families faced job loss and economic hardship. In 2003, a prescient report by United for a Fair Economy, in Shifting Fortunes, The Perils of the Growing American Wealth Gap, warned of a stark future of growing economic inequities concentrating, particularly on the middle class. It declared those who are neither in the top 10% nor the bottom 10% in income have been the big losers during the last 60 years. To this day, their wealth and earnings, as a share of the total wealth and earnings in the United States, continue to fall. The revolution destroying the American middle class began in the late 1970s and has continued unabated. Fierce cost competition from emerging foreign producers, especially China, has driven significant downsizing in the automobile, steel, manufacturing, and electronics industries as domestic companies struggled to survive and then went out of business. Processes and manpower levels are constantly examined, and then tasks are eliminated or combined. Throughout American industry, wave after wave of middle-level managers have disappeared only to seek other, mostly lower-paying jobs. Dramatic increases in computing power and software applications have brought the new streamlining technology re-engineering and artificial intelligence applications into the workplace. As never before, the middle in corporate America is much smaller. Global free trade agreements would open markets even further, accelerating the movement of capital from the U.S. to factories in China and call centers in India and elsewhere. Everywhere, consultants, efficiency experts, and computer technology have successfully achieved disintermediation, taking brokers, mid-level managers, and shop floor workers out of production, marketing, distribution, and customer service processes whenever possible.